Chapter 4 to Chapter 5 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Glendower Jones. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, translated by John Ormsby. Chapter 4 to Chapter 5. Chapter 4, in which Sancho Panza gives a satisfactory reply to the doubts and questions of the bachelor Samson Carrasco, together with other matters worth knowing and telling. Sancho came back to Don Quixote's house, and returning to the late subject of conversation, he said, "As to what Señor Samson said, that he would like to know by whom, or how, or when my ass was stolen, I say in reply, that the same night we went into the Sierra Morena, flying from the Holy Brotherhood, after that unlucky adventure of the galley slaves, and the other of the corpse that was going to Segovia, my master and I ensconced ourselves in a thicket, and there, my master leaning on his lance, and I seated on my dapple, battered and weary with the late frays, we fell asleep, as if it had been on 4 feather mattresses. And I in particular slept so sound that, whoever he was able to come and prop me up on 4 stakes, which he put under the 4 corners of the pack-saddle in such a way that he left me mounted on it, and took away Dapple from under me, without my feeling it." "That's an easy matter," said Don Quixote, "and it is no new occurrence, for the same thing happened to Sacripante at the siege of Albraca. The famous thief Brunello, by the same contrivance, took his horse from between his legs. Day came," continued Sancho, "and the moment I stirred, the stakes gave way, and I fell to the ground with a mighty come down. I looked about for the ass, but could not see him. The tears rushed to my eyes, and I raised such a lamentation that, if the author of our history has not put it in, he may depend upon it he has left out a good thing. Some days after, I know not how many, travelling with her ladyship, the Princess Micomicona, I saw my ass, and mounted on him in the dress of a gipsy, was that Jean de Passamonte, the great rogue and rascal that my master and I freed from the chain." "That is not where the mistake is," replied Samson. "It is, that before the ass has turned up, the author speaks of Sancho as being mounted on it." "Oh, I don't know what to say to that," said Sancho, "unless that the historian made a mistake, or perhaps it might be a blunder of the printers." "No doubt that's it," said Samson. "But what became of the 100 crowns? Did they vanish?" To which Sancho answered, "I spent them for my own good, and my wife's, and my children's, and it is they that have made my wife bear so patiently all my wanderings on highways and byways in the service of my master Don Quixote, for if after all this time I had come back to the house without a rap, and without the ass, it would have been a poor lookout for me. And if anyone wants to know anything more about me, here I am, ready to answer the king himself in person. And it is no affair of anyone's whether I took or did not take, whether I spent or did not spend. For the whacks that were given me in these journeys were to be paid for in money, even if they were valued at no more than 4 maravedis apiece. Another 100 crowns would not pay me for half of them. Let each look to himself, and not try to make out white black and black white, for each of us is as God made him, aye, and often worse." "I will take care," said Carrasco, to impress upon the author of the history that if he prints it again he must not forget what worthy Sancho has said, for it will raise it a good span higher." "Is there anything else to correct in the history, Señor Bachelor?" asked Don Quixote. "No doubt there is," he replied, "but not anything that will be of the same importance as those I have mentioned." "Does the author promise a second part at all?" said Don Quixote. "He does promise one," replied Samson, "but he says he has not found it, nor does he know who has got it, and we cannot say whether it will appear or not, and so on that head, as some say that no second part has ever been good, and others that enough has already been written about Don Quixote, it is thought that there will be no second part, though some, who are jovial rather than saturnine, say, 'Let us have more Quixotides, let Don Quixote charge and Sancho chatter, and no matter what it may turn out, we shall be satisfied with that.'" "And what does the author mean to do?" said Don Quixote. "What?" replied Samson. "Why, as soon as he has found the history, which he is now searching for with extraordinary diligence, he will at once give it to the press, moved more by the profit that may accrue to him from doing so than by any thought of praise." Whereat Sancho observed, "The author looks for money and profit, does he? It will be a wonder if he succeeds, for it'll be only hurry, hurry, with him like the tailor on Easter Eve, and works done in a hurry are never finished as perfectly as they ought to be. Let Master Moore, or whatever he is, pay attention to what he is doing, and I and my master will give him as much grouting ready to his hand, in the way of adventures and accidents of all sorts, as would make up not only one second part, but 100. The good man fancies, no doubt, that we are fast asleep in the straw here. But let him hold up our feet to be shod, and he will see which foot it is we go lame on. All I say is, that if my master would take my advice, we would be now afield, redressing outrages and righting wrongs, as is the use and custom of good knights errant." Sancho had hardly uttered these words when the neighing of Rocinante fell upon their ears, which neighing Don Quixote accepted as a happy omen, and he resolved to make another sally in 3 or 4 days from that time. Announcing his intention to the bachelor, he asked his advice as to the quarter in which he ought to commence his expedition, and the bachelor replied that in his opinion he ought to go to the kingdom of Aragon and the city of Saragossa, where there were to be certain solemn joustings at the festival of St. George, at which he might win renown above all the knights of Aragon, which would be winning it above all the knights of the world. He commended his very praiseworthy and gallant resolution, but admonished him to proceed with greater caution in encountering dangers, because his life did not belong to him, but to all those who had need of him to protect and aid them in their misfortunes. "There's where it is what I abominate, Señor Samson," said Sancho here. "My master will attack 100 armed men as a greedy boy would 6 melons. Body of the world, Señor Bachelor, there is a time to attack and a time to retreat, and it is not always Santiago and close Spain. Moreover, I have heard it said, and I think my master himself, if I remember rightly, that the mean of valour lies between the extremes of cowardice and rashness, and if that be so, I don't want him to fly without having good reason, or to attack when the odds make it better not. But, above all things, I warn my master that if he is to take me with him, it must be on the condition that he is to do all the fighting, and that I am not to be called upon to do anything except what concerns keeping him clean and comfortable. In this I will dance attendance on him readily, but to expect me to draw sword even against rascally churls of the hatchet and hood is idle. I don't set up to be a fighting man, Señor Samson, but only the best and most loyal squire that ever served knight errant, and if my master Don Quixote, in consideration of many faithful services, is pleased to give me some island, of the many his worship says one may stumble on in these parts, I will take it as a great favour, and if he does not give it to me, I was born like every one else, and a man must not live in dependence on anyone except God. And what is more, my bread will taste as well, and perhaps even better, without a government than if I were a governor. And how do I know but that in these governments the devil may have prepared some trip for me, to make me lose my footing and fall and knock my grinders out? Sancho I was born, and Sancho I mean to die. But for all that, if heaven were to make me a fair offer of an island, or something else of the kind, without much trouble and without much risk, I am not such a fool as to refuse it. For they say, too, when they offer thee a heifer, run with a halter, and when good luck comes to thee, take it in. Brother Sancho, said Carrasco, you have spoken like a professor. But for all that, put your trust in God and in Señor Don Quixote, for he will give you a kingdom, not to say an island. It's all the same, be it more or be it less, replied Sancho, though I can tell you, Señor Carrasco, that my master would not throw the kingdom he might give me into a sack all in holes, for I have felt my own pulse, and I find myself sound enough to rule kingdoms and govern islands, and I have before now told my master as much. Take care, Sancho, said Samson. Honours change manners, and perhaps when you find yourself a governor, you won't know the mother that bore you. That may hold good for those that are born in the ditches, said Sancho, not for those who have the fat of an old Christian 4 fingers deep on their souls as I have. Nay, only look at my disposition. Is that likely to show ingratitude to anyone? God grant it, said Don Quixote. We shall see when the government comes, and I seem to see it already. He then begged the bachelor, if he were a poet, to do him the favour of composing some verses for him, conveying the farewell he meant to take of his lady Dulcinea del Toboso, and to see that a letter of her name was placed at the beginning of each line, so that at the end of the verses Dulcinea del Toboso might be read by putting together the first letters. The bachelor replied that although he was not one of the famous poets of Spain, who were, they said, only 3½ he would not fail to compose the required verses, though he saw a great difficulty in the task, as the letters which made up the name were 17, so if he made 4 ballad stanzas of 4 lines each, there would be a letter over, and if he made them of 5, what they call decimas or redondulas, they were 3 letters short. Nevertheless, he would try to drop her a letter as well as he could, so that the name Dulcinea del Toboso might be got into 4 ballad stanzas. It must be, by some means or other, said Don Quixote, for, unless the name stands there plain and manifest, no woman would believe the verses were made for her. They agreed upon this, and that the departure should take place in 3 days from that time. Don Quixote charged the bachelor to keep it a secret, especially from the curate and Master Nicholas, and from his niece and the housekeeper, lest they should prevent the execution of his praiseworthy and valiant purpose. Carrasco promised all, and then took his leave, charging Don Quixote to inform him of his good or evil fortunes whenever he had an opportunity. And thus they bade each other farewell, and Sancho went away to make the necessary preparations for their expedition. Chapter 5. Of the shrewd and droll conversation that passed between Sancho Panza and his wife Teresa Panza, and other matters worthy of being duly recorded. The translator of this history when he comes to write this 5th chapter, says that he considers it apocryphal, because in it Sancho Panza speaks in a style unlike that which might have been expected from his limited intelligence, and says things so subtle that he does not think it possible he could have conceived them. However, desirous of doing what his task imposed upon him, he was unwilling to leave it untranslated, and therefore he went on to say, Sancho came home in such glee and spirits that his wife noticed his happiness a bowshot off, so much so that it made her ask him, "What have you got, Sancho friend, that you are so glad?" To which he replied, "Wife, if it were God's will, I should be very glad not to be so well pleased as I show myself." "I don't understand you, husband," said she, "and I don't know what you mean by saying you would be glad, if it were God's will not to be well pleased, for, fool as I am, I don't know how one can find pleasure in not having it." "Harkee, Teresa," replied Sancho, "I am glad because I have made up my mind to go back to the service of my master Don Quixote, who means to go out a 3rd time to seek for adventures, and I am going with him again, for my necessities will have it so, and also the hope that cheers me with the thought that I may find another 100 crowns like those we have spent, though it makes me sad to leave thee and the children, and if God would be pleased to let me have my daily bread dry shod and at home, without taking me out into the byways and crossroads, and he could do it at small cost by merely willing it, it is clear my happiness would be more solid and lasting, for the happiness I have is mingled with the sorrow at leaving thee, so that I was right in saying I would be glad, if it were God's will not to be well pleased." "Look here, Sancho," said Teresa, "ever since you joined on to a knight-errant you talk in such a roundabout way that there is no understanding you." "It's enough that God understands me, wife," replied Sancho, "for he is the understander of all things. That will do. But mind, sister, you must look to Dapple carefully for the next 3 days, so that he may be fit to take arms. Double his feed, and see to the pack-saddle and other harness, for it is not to a wedding we are bound, but to go round the world and play at give and take with giants and dragons and monsters, and hear hissings and roarings and bellowings and howlings, and even all this would be lavender, if we had not to reckon with young goosons and enchanted Moors." "I know well enough, husband," said Teresa, "that squires errant don't eat their bread for nothing, and so I will be always praying to our Lord to deliver you speedily from all that hard fortune." "I can tell you, wife," said Sancho, "if I did not expect to see myself governor of an island before long, I would drop down dead on the spot." "Nay then, husband," said Teresa, "let the hen live, though it be with her pip. Live, and let the devil take all the governments in the world. You came out of your mother's womb without a government. You have lived until now without a government. And when it is God's will, you will go, or be carried, to your grave without a government. How many there are in the world who live without a government, and continue to live all the same, and are reckoned in the number of the people? The best sauce in the world is hunger, and as the poor are never without that, they always eat with a relish. But mind, Sancho, if by good luck you should find yourself with some government, don't forget me and your children. Remember that Sanchico is now full 15, and it is right he should go to school, if his uncle the abbot has a mind to have him trained for the church. Consider, too, that your daughter, Marie Sancha, will not die of grief if we marry her, for I have my suspicions that she is as eager to get a husband as you to get a government, and, after all, a daughter looks better ill-married than well-whored." "By my faith," replied Sancho, "if God brings me to get any sort of government, I intend, wife, to make such a high match for Marie Sancha that there will be no approaching her without calling her my lady." "Nay, Sancho," returned Teresa, "marry her to her equal. That is the safest plan. For if you put her out of wooden clogs into high-heeled shoes, out of her grey flannel petticoat into hoops and silk gowns, out of the plain Marica and thou into Donna so and my lady, the girl won't know where she is, and at every turn she will fall into 1,000 blunders that will show the thread of her coarse homespun stuff." "Tut, you fool," said Sancho, "it will be only to practice it for 2 or 3 years, and then dignity and decorum will fit her as easily as a glove. And if not, what matter? Let her be my lady, and never mind what happens." "Keep to your own station, Sancho," replied Teresa. "Don't try to raise yourself higher, and bear in mind the proverb that says, 'Wipe the nose of your neighbour's son, and take him into your house.' A fine thing it would be indeed to marry our Maria to some great count or grand gentleman, who, when the humour took him, would abuse her, and call her clown bred, and clodhopper's daughter, and spinning wench. I have not been bringing up my daughter for all this time, I can tell you, husband. Do you bring home money, Sancho, and leave marrying her to my care. There is Lope Torcho, Juan Torco's son, a stout, sturdy young fellow that we know, and I can see he does not look sour at the girl, and with him, one of our own sort, she will be well married, and we shall have her always under our eyes, and be all one family, parents and children, grandchildren and sons-in-law, and the peace and blessing of God will dwell among us. So don't you go marrying her in those courts and grand palaces, where they won't know what to make of her, or she what to make of herself." "Why, you idiot and wife of Barabbas," said Sancho, "what do you mean by trying, without why or wherefore, to keep me from marrying my daughter to one who will give me grandchildren that will be called your lordship? Look ye, Teresa, I have always heard my elders say that he who does not know how to take advantage of luck when it comes to him has no right to complain if it gives him the go-by. And now that is a knocking at our door. It will not do to shut it out. Let us go with the favouring breeze that blows upon us." It is this sort of talk, and what Sancho says lower down, that made the translator of the history say he considered this chapter apocryphal. "Don't you see, you animal," continued Sancho, "that it will be well for me to drop into some profitable government that will lift us out of the mire, and marry Mari Sancha to whom I like, and you yourself will find yourself called Donna Teresa Panza, and sitting in church on a fine carpet and cushions and draperies, in spite and in defiance of all the born ladies of the town? No, stay as you are, growing neither greater nor less, like a tapestry figure. Let us say no more about it, for Sanchica shall be a countess, say what you will." "Are you sure of all that you say, husband?" replied Teresa. "Well, for all that, I am afraid this rank of countess for my daughter will be her ruin. You do as you like. Make a duchess or a princess of her, but I can tell you, it will not be with my willing consent. I was always a lover of equality, brother, and I can't bear to see people give themselves airs without any right. They called me Teresa at my baptism, a plain, simple name, without any additions, or tags, or fringes, of dons or donnas. Casaggio was my father's name, and as I am your wife, I am called Teresa Panza, though by right I ought to be called Teresa Casaggio. But kings go where laws like, and I am content with this name without having the Don put on top of it to make it so heavy that I cannot carry it, and I don't want to make people talk about me when they see me go dressed like a countess or a governor's wife, for they will say at once, See what airs the slut gives herself! Only yesterday she was always spinning flax, and used to go to mass with the tail of her petticoat over her head instead of a mantle. And there she goes today in a hooped gown, with her brooches and airs, as if we didn't know her. If God keeps me in my 7 senses, or 5, or whatever number I have, I am not going to bring myself to such a pass. Go you, brother, and be a government or an island man, and swagger as much as you like. For by the soul of my mother, neither my daughter nor I are going to stir a step from our village. A respectable woman should have a broken leg and keep at home, and to be busy at something is a virtuous damsel's holiday. Be off to your adventures, along with your Don Quixote, and leave us to our misadventures, for God will mend them for us according as we deserve it. I don't know, I'm sure, who fixed the Don to him, what neither his father nor grandfather had. I declare thou hast a devil of some sort in thy body, said Sancho. God help thee! What a lot of things thou hast strung together, one after the other, without head or tail. What have Casacho and the brooches and the proverbs and the airs to do with what I say? Look here, fool and dolt! For so I may call you when you don't understand my words, and run away from good fortune. If I had said that my daughter was to throw herself down from a tower, or go roaming the world as the Infanta Donna Urraca wanted to do, you would be right in not giving way to my will. But if in an instant, in less than a twinkling of an eye, I put the Don and my lady on her back, and take her out of the stubble, and place her under a canopy, on a dais, on a couch, with more velvet cushions than all the Almohades of Morocco ever had in their family, why won't you consent and fall in with my wishes? Do you know why, husband? Replied Teresa. Because of the proverb that says, who covers thee discovers thee. At the poor man people only throw a hasty glance, on the rich man they fix their eyes, and if the said rich man was once on a time poor, it is then there is the sneering, and the tattle, and spite of backbiters, and in the streets here they swarm as thick as bees. Look here, Teresa, said Sancho, and listen to what I am now going to say to you, and maybe you never heard it in all your life, and I do not give my own notions, for what I am about to say are the opinions of his reverence the preacher, who preached in this town last Lent, and who said, if I remember rightly, that all things present that our eyes behold bring themselves before us, and remain and fix themselves on our memory much better and more forcibly than things past. These observations which Sancho makes here are the other ones on account of which the translator says he regards this chapter as apocryphal, inasmuch as they are beyond Sancho's capacity. Whence it arises, he continued, that when we see any person well dressed and making a figure with rich garments and retinue of servants, it seems to lead and impel us perforce to respect him, though memory may at the same time recall to us some lowly condition in which we have seen him, but which, whether it may have been poverty or low birth, being now a thing of the past, has no existence, while the only thing that has any existence is what we see before us. And if this person, whom fortune has raised from his original lowly state, these were the very words the padre used, to his present height of prosperity, be well-bred, generous, courteous to all, without seeking to vie with those whose nobility is of ancient date, depend upon it, Teresa, no one will remember what he was, and every one will respect what he is, except indeed the envious, from whom no fair fortune is safe. I do not understand you, husband, replied Teresa. Do as you like, and don't break my head with any more speechifying and rhetoric, and if you have revolved to do what you say— Resolved, you should say, woman, said Sancho, not revolved. Don't set yourself to wrangle with me, husband, said Teresa. I speak as God pleases, and don't deal in out-of-the-way phrases. And I say, if you are bent upon having a government, take your son Sancho with you, and teach him from this time on how to hold a government, for sons ought to inherit and learn the trades of their fathers. As soon as I have the government, said Sancho, I will send for him by post, and I will send thee money, of which I shall have no lack, for there is never any want of people to lend it to governors when they have not got it. And do thou dress him so as to hide what he is, and make him look what he is to be. You send the money, said Teresa, and I'll dress him up for you as fine as you please. Then we are agreed that our daughter is to be a countess, said Sancho. The day I see her a countess, replied Teresa, it will be the same to me as if I was burying her. But once more I say, do as you please, for we women are born to this burden of being obedient to our husbands, though they be dogs. And with this she began to weep in earnest, as if she already saw Sanchica dead and buried. Sancho consoled her by saying that though he must make her a countess, he would put it off as long as possible. Here their conversation came to an end, and Sancho went back to see Don Quixote and make arrangements for their departure. End of chapter 4 to chapter 5.
Of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jamie Strassenberg. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby. Chapter 6. Of what took place between Don Quixote and his niece and housekeeper, one of the most important chapters in the whole history. While Sancho Panza and his wife, Teresa Cascayo, held above irrelevant conversation, Don Quixote's niece and housekeeper were not idle, for by 1,000 signs they began to perceive that their uncle and master meant to give them the slip the third time, and once more betake himself to his, for them, ill-errant chivalry. They strove by all the means in their power to divert him from such an unlucky scheme, but it was all preaching in the desert and hammering cold iron. Nevertheless, among many other representations made to him, the housekeeper said to him, In truth, master, if you do not keep still and stay quiet at home, and give over roaming mountains and valleys like a troubled spirit, looking for what they say are called adventures, but what I call misfortunes, I shall have to make complaint to God and the king with loud supplication to send some remedy. To which Don Quixote replied, What answer God will give to your complaints, housekeeper, I know not, nor what his majesty will answer either. I only know that if I were king I should decline to answer the numberless silly petitions they present every day, for one of the greatest among many troubles kings have is being obliged to listen to all and answer all, and therefore I should be sorry that any affairs of mine should worry him. Whereupon the housekeeper said, Tell us, señor, at his majesty's court are there no knights? There are, replied Don Quixote, and plenty of them, and it is right there should be, to set off the dignity of the prince, and for the greater glory of the king's majesty. Then might not your worship, said she, be one of those that, without stirring a step, serve their king and lord in his court? Recollect, my friend, said Don Quixote, all knights cannot be courtiers, nor can all courtiers be knights errant, nor they need be. There must be all sorts in the world, and though we may all be knights, there is a great difference between one and another, for the courtiers, without quitting their chambers, or the threshold of the court, range the world over by looking at a map, without its costing them a farthing, and without suffering heat or cold, hunger or thirst. But we, the true knights errant, measure the whole earth with our own feet, exposed to the sun, to the cold, to the air, to the inclemencies of heaven, by day and night, on foot and on horseback. Nor do we only know enemies in pictures, but in their own real shapes, and at all risks and on all occasions we attack them, without any regard to childish points or rules of single combat. Whether one has or has not a shorter lance or sword, whether one carries relics or any secret contrivance about him, whether or not the sun is to be divided and portioned out, and other niceties of the sort that are observed in set combats of man to man, that you know nothing about, but I do. And you must know besides, that the true knight-errant, though he may see 10 giants, that not only touch the clouds with their heads but pierce them, and that go, each of them, on 2 tall towers by way of legs, and whose arms are like the masts of mighty ships, and each eye like a great mill-wheel, and glowing brighter than a glass furnace, must not on any account be dismayed by them. On the contrary, he must attack and fall upon them with a gallant bearing and a fearless heart, and, if possible, vanquish and destroy them, even though they have for armour the shells of a certain fish, that they are harder than diamonds, and in place of swords wield trenchant blades of Damascus steel, or clubs studded with spikes also of steel, such as I have more than once seen. All this I say, housekeeper, that you may see the difference there is between one sort of knight and the other, and it would be well if there were no prince who did not set a higher value on the second, or more properly speaking, first, kind of knight-errant. For, as we read in their histories, there have been some among them who have been the salvation not merely of one kingdom, but of many. Ah, señor, here exclaimed the niece, remember that all this you are saying about knights-errant is fable and fiction, and their histories, if indeed they were not burned, would deserve each of them to have a San Benito put on it, or by some mark by which it might be known as infamous and a corrupter of good manners. By the God that gives me life, said Don Quixote, if thou wert not my full niece, being daughter of my own sister, I would inflict a chastisement upon thee for the blasphemy thou hast uttered that all the world should ring with. What, can it be the young hussy that hardly knows how to handle a dozen lace bobbins dares to wag her tongue and criticize the histories of knights-errant? What would Señor Amadis say if he heard such a thing? He, however, would no doubt forgive thee, for he was the most humble-minded and courteous knight of his time, and moreover a great protector of damsels. But some there are that might have heard thee, and it would not have been well for thee in that case, for they are not all courteous or mannerly, some are ill-conditioned scoundrels, nor is it every one that calls himself a gentleman that is so in all respects. Some are gold, others pinchbeck, and all look like gentlemen, but not all can stand the touchstone of truth. There are men of low rank who strain themselves to bursting to pass for gentlemen, and high gentlemen who, one would fancy, were dying to pass for men of low rank. The former raise themselves by their ambition or by their virtues, the latter debase themselves by their lack of spirit or by their vices, and one has need of experience and discernment to distinguish these 2 kinds of gentlemen, so alike in name and so different in conduct. God bless me, said the niece, that you should know so much, uncle, enough, if need be, to get up into a pulpit and go preach to the streets, and yet that you should fall into a delusion so great and a folly so manifest as to try to make yourself out vigorous when you are old, strong when you are sickly, able to put straight what is crooked when you yourself are bent by age, and, above all, a caballero when you are not one, for though gentlefolk may be so, poor men are nothing of the kind. There is a great deal of truth in what you say, niece, returned Don Quixote, and I could tell you somewhat about birth that would astonish you, but, not to mix up things human and divine, I refrain. Look you, my dears, all the lineages in the world, attend to what I am saying, can be reduced to 4 sorts, which are these: those that had humble beginnings, and went on spreading and extending themselves until they had attained surpassing greatness; those that had great beginnings and maintained them, and still maintain and uphold the greatness of their origin; those, again, that from a great beginning have ended in a point like a pyramid, having reduced and lessened their original greatness till it has come to naught, like the point of a pyramid, which, relatively to its base or foundation, is nothing. And it is they that are the most numerous, that have had neither an illustrious beginning nor a remarkable mid-course, and so will have an end without a name, like an ordinary plebeian line. Of the first, those that had a humble origin, and rose to the greatness they still preserve, the Ottoman house may serve as an example, from which a humble and lowly shepherd, its founder, has reached the height at which we now see it. For examples of the second sort of lineage, that begin with greatness, and maintained it still without adding to it, there are many princes who have inherited the dignity, and maintained themselves in their inheritance, without increasing or diminishing it, keeping peacefully within the limits of their states. Of those that began great and ended at a point, there are thousands of examples, for all the Pharaohs and Ptolemies of Egypt, the Caesars of Rome, and the whole herd, if I may say such a word to them, of countless princes, monarchs, lords, Medes, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and barbarians. All these lineages and lordships have ended in a point and come to nothing, they themselves as well as their founders. For it would be impossible now to find one of their descendants, and even should we find one, it would be in some lowly and humble condition. Of plebeian lineages I have nothing to say, save that they merely serve to swell the number of those that live, without any eminence to entitle them to any fame or praise beyond this. From all I have said I would have you gather, my poor innocents, that great is the confusion among lineages, and that only those are seen to be great and illustrious that show themselves so by the virtue, wealth, and generosity of their possessors. I have said virtue, wealth, and generosity, because a great man who is vicious will be a great example of vice, and a rich man who is not generous will be merely a miserly beggar. For the possessor of wealth is not made happy by possessing it, but by spending it, and not by spending as he pleases, but by knowing how to spend it well. The poor gentleman has no way of showing that he is a gentleman but by virtue, by being affable, well-bred, courteous, gentle-mannered, and kindly, not haughty, arrogant, or censorious, but above all by being charitable. For by 2 maravedis given with a cheerful heart to the poor, he will show himself as generous as he who distributes alms with bell-ringing. And no one that perceives him to be endowed with the virtues I have named, even though he know him not, will fail to recognize and set him down as one of good blood. And it would be strange were it not so. Praise has ever been the reward of virtue, and those who are virtuous cannot fail to receive commendation. There are 2 roads, my daughters, by which men may reach wealth and honours. One is that of letters, the other that of arms. I have more of arms than of letters in my composition, and, by judging my inclination to arms, was born under the influence of the planet Mars. I am, therefore, in a measure constrained to follow that road, and by it I must travel in spite of all the world, and it will be labour in vain for you to urge me to resist what heaven wills, fate ordains, reason requires, and, above all, my own inclination favours. For knowing us as I do, the countless toils that are the accompanies of knight-errantry, I know, too, the infinite blessings that are attained by it. I know that the path of virtue is very narrow, and the road of vice broad and spacious. I know their ends and goals are different. For the broad and easy road of vice ends in death, and the narrow and toilsome one of virtue in life, and not transitory life, but that which has no end. I know, as that great Castilian poet says, that it is by rugged paths like these they go, that scale the heights of immortality, unreached by those that falter here below. Woe is me! Exclaimed the niece. My lord is a poet too! He knows everything, and he can do everything. I will bet, if he chose to turn mason, he would make a house as easily as a cage. I can tell you, niece, replied Don Quixote, if these chivalrous thoughts did not engage all my faculties, there would be nothing that I could not do, nor any sort of knick-knack that would not come from my hands, particularly cages and toothpicks. At this moment there came a knocking at the door, and when they asked who was there, Sancho Panza made answer that it was he. The instant the housekeeper knew who it was, she ran to hide herself so as not to see him. In such abhorrence did she hold him. The niece let him in, and his master Don Quixote came forward to receive him with open arms, and the pair shut themselves up in his room, where they had another conversation not inferior to the previous one. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Of what passed between Don Quixote and his squire, together with other very notable incidents. The instant the housekeeper saw Sancho Panza shut himself in with her master, she guessed what they were about, and suspecting that the result of the consultation would be a resolve to undertake a third sally, she seized her mantle, and in deep anxiety and distress ran to find the bachelor Samson Carrasco, as she thought that, being a well-spoken man and a new friend of her master's, he might be able to persuade him to give up any such crazy notion. She found him pacing the patio of his house, and, perspiring and flurried, she fell at his feet the moment she saw him. Carrasco, seeing how distressed and overcome was she, said to her, "What is this, mistress housekeeper? What has happened to you? One would think you heartbroken." "Nothing, Señor Samson," said she, "only that my master is breaking out, plainly breaking out." "Whereabouts is he breaking out, señora?" asked Samson. "Has any part of his body burst?" "He is only breaking out at the door of his madness," she replied. "I mean, dear señor bachelor, that he is going to break out again, and this will be the third time, to hunt all over the world for what he calls ventures, though I can't make out why he gives them that name. The first time he was brought back to us slung across the back of an ass, and belaboured all over. And the second time he came in on an ox cart, shut up in a cage, in which he persuaded himself he was enchanted, and the poor creature was in such a state that the mother that bore him would not have known him, lean, yellow, with eyes sunk deep in the cells of his skull, so that to bring him around again, ever so little, cost me more than 600 eggs, as God knows, and all the world, and my hens too, that won't let me tell a lie." "That I can well believe," replied the bachelor, "for they are so good and so fat, and so well bred, that they would not say one thing for another, though they were to burst for it. In short then, mistress housekeeper, that is all, and there is nothing the matter, except what it is feared Don Quixote may do?" "No, señor," said she. "Well then," returned the bachelor, "don't be uneasy, but go home in peace. Get me ready something hot for breakfast, and while you are on the way, say the prayer of Santa Apollonia, that is, if you know it, for I will come presently, and you will see miracles." "Woe is me!" cried the housekeeper. "Is it the prayer of Santa Apollonia that you would have me say? That would do if it was the toothache my master had, but it is in the brains, that is what he has got." "I know what I am saying, mistress housekeeper. Go, and don't set yourself to argue with me, for you know that I am a bachelor of Salamanca, and one can't be more of a bachelor than that," replied Carrasco. And with this the housekeeper retired, and the bachelor went out to look for the curate, and arrange with him what will be told in its proper place. While Don Quixote and Sancho were shut up together, they had a discussion which the history records with great precision and scrupulous exactness. Sancho said to his master, "Señor, I have educated my wife to let me go with your worship whenever you choose to take me." "Induced, you should say, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "not educed." "Once or twice, as well as I remember," replied Sancho, "I have begged of your worship not to mend my words, if so be as you understand what I mean by them. And if you don't understand them, to say Sancho, or devil, I don't understand thee, and if I don't make my meaning plain, then you may correct me, for I am so facile." "I don't understand thee, Sancho," said Don Quixote at once, "for I know not what I am so facile means." "So facile means I am so much that way." "I understand thee still less now," said Don Quixote. "Well, if you can't understand me," said Sancho, "I don't know how to put it. I know no more. God help me." "Oh, now I have hit it," said Don Quixote. "Thou wouldst say thou art so docile, tractable, and gentle that thou wilt take what I say to thee, and submit to what I teach thee." "I would bet," said Sancho, "that from the very first you understood me, and knew what I meant, but you wanted to put me out that you might hear me make another couple of dozen blunders." "Maybe so," replied Don Quixote. "But to come to the point, what does Teresa say?" "Teresa says," replied Sancho, "that I should make sure with your worship, and let's papers speak and beards be still, for he who binds does not wrangle, since one take is better than two, I'll give these, and I say a woman's advice is no great thing, and he who won't take it is a fool." "And so say I," said Don Quixote. "Continue, Sancho my friend, go on, you talk pearls to-day." "The fact is," continued Sancho, "that as your worship knows better than I do, we are all of us liable to death, and to-day we are, and to-morrow we are not, and the lamb goes as soon as the sheep, and nobody can promise himself more hours of life in this world than God may be pleased to give him. For death is deaf, and when it comes to knock at our life's door, it is always urgent, and neither prayers nor struggles, nor sceptres, nor meters can keep it back, as common talk and report say, and as they tell us from the pulpits every day." "All that is very true," said Don Quixote, "but I cannot make out what thou art driving at." "What I am driving at," said Sancho, "is that your worship settle some fixed wages for me, to be paid monthly while I am in your service, and that the same be paid me out of your estate, for I don't care to stand on rewards which either come late, or ill, or never at all. God help me with my own. In short, I would like to know what I am to get, be it much or little, for the hen will lay one egg, and many littles make a much, and so long as one gains something there is nothing lost. To be sure, if it happen that I neither believe nor expect that your worship were to give me that island you have promised me, I am not so ungrateful nor grasping, but that I will be willing to have the revenue of such island valued and stopped out of my wages in due promotion." "Sancho, my friend," replied Don Quixote, "sometimes proportion may be as good as promotion." "I see," said Sancho. "I'll bet I ought to have said proportion, and not promotion, but it is no matter, as your worship has understood me." "And so well understood," returned Don Quixote, "that I have seen into the depths of thy thoughts, and know the mark thou art shooting at with the countless shafts of thy proverbs. Look here, Sancho, I would readily fix thy wages if I ever had found any instance in the histories of the knights errant to show or indicate, by the slightest hint, that their squires used to get monthly or yearly; but I have read all or the best part of their histories, and I cannot remember reading of any knight errant having assigned fixed wages to a squire. I only know that they have all served on reward, and that when they least expected it, if good luck attended their masters, they found themselves recompensed with an island or something equivalent to it, or at least they were left with a title and a lordship. If with these hopes and additional inducements you, Sancho, please to return to my service, well and good; but to suppose that I am going to disturb or unhinge the ancient usage of knight errantry, it is all nonsense. And so, my Sancho, get you back to your house, and explain my intentions to your Teresa, and if she likes and you're like to be on reward to me, bene quidem; but if not, we remain friends, for if the pigeon house does not lack food, it will not lack pigeons; and bear in mind, my son, that a good hope is better than a bad holding, and a good grievance better than a bad compensation. I speak in this way, Sancho, to show you that I can shower down proverbs just as well as yourself; and in short, I mean to say, and I do say, that if you don't like to come on reward with me, and run the same chance that I run, God be with you, and make a saint of you; for I shall find plenty of squires more obedient and painstaking, and not so thick-headed or talkative as you are." When Sancho heard his master's firm, resolute language, a cloud came over the sky with him, and the wings of his heart dropped; for he had made sure that his master would not go on without him, for all the wealth in the world; and he stood there dumbfoundered and moody. Samson Carrasco came in with the housekeeper and niece, who were anxious to hear what arguments he was about to dissuade their master from going to seek adventures. The arch-wag Samson came forward, and embracing him as he had done before, said with a loud voice, "O flower of knight errantry! O shining light of arms! O honour and mirror of the Spanish nation! May God Almighty in his infinite power grant that any person or persons who would impede or hinder thy third sally may find no way out of the labyrinth of their schemes, nor ever accomplish what they most desire." And then, turning to the housekeeper, he said, "Mistress housekeeper may just as well give over saying the prayer of Santa Apollonia, for I know it is the positive determination of the spheres that Señor Don Quixote shall proceed to put into execution his new and lofty designs, and I should lay a heavy burden on my conscience did I not urge and persuade this knight not to keep the might of his strong arm and the virtue of his valiant spirit any longer curbed and checked, for by his inactivity he is defrauding the world of the redress of wrongs, and of the protection of orphans, of the honour of virgins, of the aid of widows, and of the support of wives, and other matters of this kind appertaining, belonging, proper and peculiar to the order of knight errantry. On then, my lord Don Quixote, beautiful and brave, let your worship and highness set out to-day rather than to-morrow, and if anything be needed for the execution of your purpose, here I am ready in person and purse to supply the want, and were it requisite to attend to your magnificence as squire, I should esteem it the happiest good fortune." At this Don Quixote, turning to Sancho, said, "Did I not tell thee, Sancho, that there would be squires enough and to spare for me? See now who offers to become one, no less than the illustrious bachelor Samson Carrasco, the perpetual joy and delight of the courts of the Salamancan schools, sound in body, discreet, patient under heat or cold, hunger or thirst, with all the qualifications requisite to make a knight-errant squire; but heaven forbid that, to gratify my own inclination, I should shake or shatter this pillar of letters and vessel of the sciences, and cut down this towering palm of the fair and liberal arts. Let this new Samson remain in his own country, and, bringing honour to it, bring honour at the same time on the grey heads of the venerable parents; for I will be content with any squire that comes to hand, as Sancho does not deign to accompany me." "I do deign," said Sancho, deeply moved, with tears in his eyes. "It shall not be said of me, master mine," he continued, "the bread eaten and the company dispersed. Nay, I come of no ungrateful stock, for all the world knows, but peculiarly my own town, who the Panzas from whom I am descended were, and, what is more, I know and have learned, by many good words and deeds, your worship's desire to show me favour, and if I have been bargaining more or less about my wages, it was only to please my wife, who, when she sets herself to press a point, no hammer drives the hoops of a cask as she drives one to do what she wants. But, after all, a man must be a man and a woman, and as I am a man anyhow, which I can't deny, I will be one in my own house too, let who will take it amiss, and so there's nothing more to do but for your worship to make your will with its codicil in such a way that it can't be provoked. And let us all set out at once, to save Señor Samson's soul from suffering, as he says his conscience obliges him to persuade your worship to sally out upon the world a third time. So I offer again to serve your worship faithfully and loyally, as well and better than all the squires that served knights errant in times past or present." The bachelor was filled with amazement when he heard Sancho's phraseology and style of talk, for though he had read the first part of the master's history, he had never thought he could be so droll as he was there described. But now, hearing him talk of a will and codicil that could not be provoked, instead of will and codicil that could not be revoked, he believed all he had read of him, and set him down as one of the greatest simpletons of modern times, and he said to himself that two such lunatics as master and man of the world had never seen. In fine, Don Quixote and Sancho embraced one another and made friends, and by the advice and with the approval of the great Carrasco, who was now their oracle, it was arranged that their departure should take place 3 days thence, by which time they could have all that was requisite for the journey ready, and procure a closed helmet, which Don Quixote said he must by all means take. Samson offered him one, as he knew a friend of his who had it would not refuse to him, though it was more dingy with rust and mildew than bright and clean like burnished steel. The curses which both housekeeper and niece poured out on the bachelor were past counting. They tore their hair, they clawed their faces, and in the style of the hired mourners that were once in fashion, they raised a lamentation over the departure of their master and uncle, as if it had been his death. Samson's intention in persuading him to sally forth once more was to do what the history relates farther on, all by the advice of the curate and the barber, with whom he had previously discussed the subject. Finally, then, during those 3 days, Don Quixote and Sancho provided themselves with what they considered necessary, and Sancho having pacified his wife, and Don Quixote his niece and housekeeper, at nightfall, unseen by anyone except the bachelor, who thought fit to accompany them half a league out of the village, they set out for El Toboso, Don Quixote on his good Rocinante, and Sancho on his old Dapple, his alforjas furnished with certain matters in the way of victuals, and his purse with money that Don Quixote gave him to meet emergencies. Samson embraced him, and entreated him to let him hear of his good or evil fortunes, so that he might rejoice over the former, or condole with him over the latter, as the laws of friendship required. Don Quixote promised him that he would do so, and Samson returned to the village, and the other two took the road for the great city of El Toboso. End of Chapter 7. Recording by Jamie Strassenberg, Cypress, California.
Eight and 9 of Don Quixote, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. Don Quixote, Volume 2, by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra. Translated by John Ormsby, Chapters 8 and 9. Chapter 8, wherein is related what befell Don Quixote on his way to see his lady Dulcinea del Toboso. "Blessed be Allah the all-powerful," says Hamete Benengeli, on beginning this 8th chapter. "Blessed be Allah," he repeats 3 times, and he says he utters these thanksgivings at seeing that he has now got Don Quixote and Sancho fairly afield, and that the readers of his delightful history may reckon that the achievements and humours of Don Quixote and his squire are now about to begin, and he urges them to forget the formal chivalries of the ingenious gentleman, and to fix their eyes on those that are to come, which now begin on the road to El Toboso, as the others began on the plains of Montiel, nor is it much that he asks in consideration of all he promises, and so he goes on to say: Don Quixote and Sancho were left alone, and the moment Samson took his departure, Rocinante began to neigh, and Dapple to sigh, which by both knight and squire was accepted as a good sign and a very happy omen, though, if the truth is to be told, the sighs and brays of Dapple were louder than the neighings of the hack, from which Sancho inferred that his good fortune was to exceed and overtop that of his master, building perhaps upon some judicial astrology that he may have known, though the history says nothing about it. All that can be said is, that when he stumbled or fell, he was heard to say he wished he had not come out, for by stumbling or falling there was nothing to be got but a damaged shoe or a broken rib, and, fool as he was not much astray in this. Said Don Quixote, "Sancho, my friend, night is drawing on upon us as we go, and more darkly than will allow us to reach El Toboso by daylight, for there I am resolved to go before I engage in another adventure, and there I shall obtain the blessing and generous permission of the peerless Dulcinea, with which permission I expect and feel assured that I shall conclude and bring to a happy termination every perilous adventure, for nothing in life makes knights errant more valorous than finding themselves favoured by their ladies." "So I believe," replied Sancho, "but I think it will be difficult for your worship to speak with her or see her, at any rate where you will be able to receive her blessing, unless, indeed, she throws it over the wall of the yard where I saw her the time before, when I took her the letter that told of the follies and mad things your worship was doing in the heart of Sierra Morena." "Didst thou take that for a yard wall, Sancho?" said Don Quixote, "where or at which thou sawest that never sufficiently extolled grace and beauty? It must have been the gallery, corridor, or portico of some rich and royal palace." "It might have been all that," returned Sancho, "but to me it looked like a wall, unless I am short of memory." "At all events, let us go there, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "for so that I see her, it is the same to me whether it be over a wall, or at a window, or through the chink of a door, or the grate of a garden. For any beam of the sun of her beauty that reaches my eyes will give light to my reason and strength to my heart, so that I shall be unmatched and unequalled in wisdom and valor." "Well, to tell the truth, señor," said Sancho, "when I saw that son of the lady Dulcinea del Toboso, it was not bright enough to throw out beams at all. It must have been that as her grace was sifting that wheat I told you of, the thick dust she raised came before her face like a cloud and dimmed it." "What! dost thou still persist, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "in saying, thinking, believing, and maintaining that my lady Dulcinea was sifting wheat? That being an occupation and task entirely at variance with what is and should be the employment of persons of distinction, who are constituted and reserved for other avocations and pursuits that show their rank a bowshot off." "Thou hast forgotten, old Sancho, those lines of our poet wherein he paints for us how, in their crystal abodes, those four nymphs employed themselves, who rose from their loved Tagus, and seated themselves in a verdant meadow, to embroider those tissues, and which the ingenious poet there describes to us, how they were worked and woven with gold and silk and pearls. And something of this sort must have been the employment of my lady when thou sawest her, only that the spite which some wicked enchanter seems to have against everything of mine changes all those things that give me pleasure, and turns them into shapes unlike their own. And so I fear that in that history of my achievements which, they say, is now in print, if haply its author was some sage who is an enemy of mine, he will have put one thing for another, mingling 1,000 lies with one truth, and amusing himself by relating transactions which have nothing to do with the sequence of a true history. Oh, envy, root of all countless evils, and cankerworm of the virtues! All the vices, Sancho, bring some kind of pleasure with them, but envy brings nothing but irritation, bitterness, and rage." "So I say too," replied Sancho, "and I suspect in that legend or history of us that the bachelor Samson Carrasco told us he saw, my honour goes dragged in the dirt, knocked about up and down, sweeping the streets, as they say. And yet, on the faith of an honest man, I never spoke ill of any enchanter, and I am not so well off that I am to be envied. To be sure, I am rather sly, and I have a certain spice of the rogue in me, but all is covered by the great cloak of my simplicity, always natural and never acted, and if I had no other merit, save that I believe, as I always do, firmly and truly in God and all the holy Roman Catholic Church holds and believes, and that I am a mortal enemy of the Jews, the historians ought to have mercy on me and treat me well in their writings. But let them say what they like. Naked was I born, naked I find myself. I neither lose nor gain. Nay, while I see myself put into a book and passed on from hand to hand over the world, I don't care a fig. Let them say what they like of me." "That, Sancho," returned Don Quixote, "reminds me of what happened to a famous poet of our own day, who, having written a bitter satire against all the courtesan ladies, did not insert or name in it a certain lady of whom it was questionable whether she was one or not. She, seeing she was not in the list of the poet, asked him what he had seen in her that he did not include her in the number of the others, telling him he must add to his satire and put her in the new part, or else look out for the consequences. The poet did as she bade him, and left her without a shred of reputation, and she was satisfied by getting fame, though it was infamy. In keeping with this is what they relate of that shepherd who set fire to the famous temple of Diana, by repute one of the 7 wonders of the world, and burned it with the sole object of making his name live in after ages. And though it was forbidden to name him, or mention his name by word of mouth or in writing, lest the object of his ambition should be attained, nevertheless it became known that he was called Erostratus. And something of the same sort is what happened in the case of the great Emperor Charles V and a gentleman in Rome. The emperor was anxious to see that famous temple of the Rotunda, called in ancient times the Temple of all the Gods, but nowadays, by a better nomenclature, of all the Saints, which is the best preserved building of all those of pagan construction in Rome, and the one which best sustains the reputation of mighty works and magnificence of its founders. It is in the form of a half-orange, of enormous dimensions, and well lighted, though no light penetrates it save that which is admitted by a window, or rather round skylight, at the top. And it was from this that the emperor examined the building. A Roman gentleman stood by his side and explained to him the skilful construction and ingenuity of the vast fabric and its wonderful architecture. And when they had left the skylight, he said to the emperor, "1,000 times, your sacred majesty, the impulse came upon me to seize your majesty in my arms and fling myself down from yonder skylight, so as to leave behind me in the world a name that would last forever." "I am thankful to you for not carrying such an evil thought into effect," said the emperor, "and I shall give you no opportunity in future of again putting your loyalty to the test. And I therefore forbid you ever to speak to me or to be where I am." And he followed up these words by bestowing a liberal bounty on him. My meaning is, Sancho, that the desire of acquiring fame is a very powerful motive. What thinkest thou was it that flung Horatius in full armour down from the bridge into the depths of the Tiber? What burned the hand and arm of Mutius? What impelled Curtius to plunge into the deep burning gulf that opened in the midst of Rome? What, in opposition to all the omens that declared against him, made Julius Caesar cross the Rubicon? And to come to more modern examples, what scuttled the ships, and left stranded and cut off the gallant Spaniards under the command of the most courteous Cortes in the New World? All these and a variety of other great exploits are, were, and will be the work of fame that mortals desire as a reward and a portion of the immortality their famous deeds deserve. Though we Catholic Christians and knights errant look more to that future glory that is everlasting in the ethereal regions of heaven than to the vanity of the fame that is to be acquired in this present transitory life, a fame that, however long it may last, must after all end with the world itself, which has its own appointed end. So that, O Sancho, in what we do, we must not overpass the bounds which the Christian religion we profess has assigned to us. We have to slay pride in giants, envy by generosity and nobleness of heart, anger by calmness of demeanor and equanimity, gluttony and sloth by the spareness of our diet and the length of our vigils, lust and lewdness by the loyalty we preserve by those whom we have made the mistresses of our thoughts, indolence by traversing the world in all directions, seeking opportunities of making ourselves, besides Christians, famous knights. Such, Sancho, are the means by which we reach those extremes of praise that fair fame carries with it. All that your worship has said so far, said Sancho, I have understood quite well, but still, I would be glad if your worship would dissolve a doubt for me which has just this minute come into my mind. Solve, thou meanest, Sancho. Say on in God's name, and I will answer as well as I can. Tell me, Señor, Sancho went on to say, those Julys or Augusts, and all those venturous knights that you say are now dead, where are they now? The heathens, replied Don Quixote, are no doubt in hell. The Christians, if they were good Christians, are either in purgatory or in heaven. Very good, said Sancho, but now I want to know. The tombs where the bodies of those great lords are, have they silver lamps before them, or are the walls of their chapels ornamented with crutches, winding sheets, tresses of hair, legs and eyes in wax? Or what are they ornamented with? To which Don Quixote made answer, the tombs of the heathens were generally sumptuous temples. The ashes of Julius Caesar's body were placed on the top of a stone pyramid of vast size, which they now call in Rome St. Peter's Needle. The Emperor Hadrian had for a tomb a castle as large as a good-sized village, which they called the Molus Adriani, and is now the castle of St. Angelo in Rome. The Queen Artemisia buried her husband Mausolus in a tomb which was reckoned one of the 7 wonders of the world. But none of these tombs, or of the many others of the heathens, were ornamented with winding sheets or any of those other offerings and tokens that show that they who are buried there are saints. That's the point I'm coming to, said Sancho, and now tell me, which is the greater work, to bring a dead man to life or to kill a giant? The answer is easy, replied Don Quixote. It is a greater work to bring to life a dead man. Now I've got you, said Sancho. In that case, the fame of them who bring the dead to life, who give sight to the blind, cure cripples, restore health to the sick, and before whose tombs there are lamps burning, and whose chapels are filled with devout folk on their knees adoring their relics, be a better fame in this life and in the other than that which all the heathen emperors and knights errant that have ever been in the world have left or may leave behind them. That I grant too, said Don Quixote. Then this fame, these favors, these privileges, or whatever you call it, said Sancho, belong to the bodies and relics of the saints who, with the approbation and permission of your holy mother church, have lamps, tapers, winding sheets, crutches, pictures, eyes, and legs, by means of which they increase devotion and add to their own Christian reputation. Kings carry the bodies or relics of saints on their shoulders, and kiss bits of their bones, and enrich and adorn their oratories and favorite altars with them. What wouldst thou have me infer from all thou hast said, Sancho? asked Don Quixote. My meaning is, said Sancho, let us set about becoming saints, and we shall obtain more quickly the fair fame we are striving after. For you know, señor, yesterday or the day before yesterday, for it is so lately one may say so, they canonized and beatified 2 little barefoot friars, and it is now reckoned the greatest good luck to kiss or touch the iron chains with which they girt and tortured their bodies, and they are held in greater veneration, so it is said, than the sword of Roland in the armory of our lord the king, whom God preserve. So that, señor, it is better to be an humble little friar of no matter what order, than a valiant knight-errant. With God, a couple of dozen penance lashings are of more avail than 2,000 lance thrusts, be they given to giants, or monsters, or dragons." "All that is true," returned Don Quixote, "but we cannot all be friars, and many are the ways by which God takes his own to heaven. Chivalry is a religion. There are sainted knights in glory." "Yes," said Sancho, "but I have heard say that there are more friars in heaven than knights errant." "That," said Don Quixote, "is because those in religious orders are more numerous than knights." "The errants are many," said Sancho. "Many," replied Don Quixote, "but few they are who deserve the name of knights." With these and other discussions of the same sort they passed that night and the following day, without anything worth mention happening to them, whereat Don Quixote was not a little dejected; but at length the next day, at daybreak, they descried the great city of El Toboso, at the sight of which Don Quixote's spirits rose and Sancho's fell, for he did not know Dulcinea's house, nor in all his life had he ever seen her, any more than his master; so that they were both uneasy, the one to see her, the other at not having seen her, and Sancho was at a loss to know what he was to do when his master sent him to El Toboso. In the end Don Quixote made up his mind to enter the city at nightfall, and they waited until the time came among some oak trees that were near El Toboso, and when the moment they had agreed upon arrived, they made their entrance into the city, where something happened them that may fairly be called something. Chapter 8. Chapter 9, wherein is related what will be seen there. 'Twas at the very midnight hour, more or less, when Don Quixote and Sancho quitted the wood and entered El Toboso. The town was in deep silence, for all the inhabitants were asleep, and stretched on the broad of their backs, as the saying is. The night was darkish, though Sancho would have been glad had it been quite dark, so as to find in the darkness an excuse for his blundering. All over the place nothing was to be heard except the barking of dogs, which deafened the ears of Don Quixote and troubled the heart of Sancho. Now and then an ass brayed, pigs grunted, cats mewed, and the various noises they made seemed louder in the silence of the night, all which the enamoured knight took to be of evil omen. Nevertheless, he said to Sancho, "Sancho, my son, lead on to the palace of Dulcinea. It may be that we shall find her awake." "Body of the sun! What palace am I to lead to?" said Sancho, "when what I saw her highness in was only a very little house?" "Most likely she had then withdrawn into some small apartment of her palace," said Don Quixote, "to amuse herself with damsels, as great ladies and princesses are accustomed to." "Señor," said Sancho, "if your worship will have it in spite of me that the house of my lady Dulcinea is a palace, is this an hour, think you, to find the door open? And will it be right for us to go knocking till they hear us and open the door, making a disturbance and confusion all through the household? Are we going, do you fancy, to the house of our wenches, like gallants who come and knock and go in at any hour, however late it may be?" "Let us first of all find out the palace for certain," replied Don Quixote, "and then I will tell thee, Sancho, what we had best do. But look, Sancho, for either I see badly, or that dark mass that one sees from here should be Dulcinea's palace." "Then let your worship lead the way," said Sancho. "Perhaps it may be so. Though I see it with my eyes and touch it with my hands, I'll believe it as much as I believe it is daylight now." Don Quixote took the lead, and having gone a matter of 200 paces, he came upon the mass that produced the shade, and found it was a great tower, and then he perceived that the building in question was no palace, but the chief church of the town, and said he, "It's the church we have lit upon, Sancho." "So I see," said Sancho, "and God grant we may not light upon our graves. It is no good sign to find oneself wandering in a graveyard at this time of night, and that after my telling your worship. if I don't mistake, that the house of this lady will be in an alley without an outlet." "The curse of God on thee for a blockhead!" said Don Quixote. "What, hast thou ever heard of castles and royal palaces being built in alleys without an outlet?" "Señor," replied Sancho, "every country has a way of its own. Perhaps here in El Toboso it is the way to build palaces and grand buildings in alleys. So I entreat your worship to let me search about among these streets or alleys before me, and perhaps in some corner or other I may stumble upon this palace, and I wish I saw the dogs eating it for leading us such a dance." "Speak respectfully of what belongs to my lady, Sancho," said Don Quixote. "Let us keep the feast in peace, and not throw the rope after the bucket." "I'll hold my tongue," said Sancho. "But how am I to take it patiently when your worship wants me, with only once seeing the house of our mistress, to know always, and find it in the middle of the night, when your worship can't find it, who must have seen it thousands of times?" "Thou wilt drive me to desperation, Sancho," said Don Quixote. "Look here, heretic, have I not told thee 1,000 times that I have never once in my life seen the peerless Dulcinea, or crossed the threshold of her palace, and that I am enamoured solely by hearsay, and by the great reputation she bears for beauty and discretion?" "I hear it now," returned Sancho, "and I may tell you that if you have not seen her, no more have I." "That cannot be," said Don Quixote, "for at any rate thou saidst, on bringing back the answer to the letter I sent by thee, that thou sawest her sifting wheat." "Don't mind that, señor. I must tell you that my seeing her and the answer I brought you back were by hearsay too, for I can no more tell who the lady Dulcinea is than I can hit the sky." "Sancho, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "there are times for jests and times when jests are out of place. If I tell thee that I have neither seen nor spoken to the lady of my heart, it is no reason why thou shouldst say thou hast not spoken to her or seen her, when the contrary is the case, as thou well knowest." While the two were engaged in this conversation, they perceived someone with a pair of mules approaching the spot where they stood, and from the noise the plough made, as it dragged along the ground, they guessed him to be some labourer who had got up before daybreak to go to his work, and so it proved to be. He came along singing the ballad that says: "Il did ye fare, ye men of France, in Roncesvalles chase." "May I die, Sancho," said Don Quixote when he had heard him, "if any good will come to us tonight. Dost thou not hear what that clown is singing?" "I do," said Sancho, but what has Roncesvalles chase to do with what we have in mind? He might just as well be singing the ballad of Calainos, for any good or ill that can come to us in our business." By this time the labourer had come up, and Don Quixote said to him, "Can you tell me, worthy friend, and God speed you, whereabouts here is the palace of the peerless princess Dona Dulcinea del Toboso?" "Señor," replied the lad, "I am a stranger, and I have been only a few days in the town, doing farm work for a rich farmer. In that house opposite there live the curate of the village and the sacristan, and both or either of them will be able to give your worship some account of this lady princess, for they have a list of all the people of El Toboso, though it is my belief there is not a princess living in the whole of it. Many ladies there are of quality, and in her own house each of them may be a princess." "Well, then, she I am inquiring for will be one of these, my friend," said Don Quixote. "Maybe so," replied the lad. "God be with you, for here comes the daylight." And without waiting for any more of his questions, he whipped on his mules. Sancho, seeing his master downcast and somewhat dissatisfied, said to him, "Señor, daylight will be here before long, and it will not do for us to let the sun find us in the street. It will be better for us to quit the city, and for your worship to hide in some forest in the neighbourhood, and I will come back in the daytime, and I won't leave a nook or corner of the whole village that I won't search for the house, castle, or palace of my lady. And it will be hard luck for me if I don't find it, and as soon as I have found it I will speak to her grace, and tell her where and how your worship is waiting for her, to arrange some plan for you to see her without any damage to her honour and reputation." "Sancho," said Don Quixote, "thou hast delivered 1,000 sentences condensed in the compass of a few words. I thank thee for the advice thou hast given me, and take it most gladly. Come, my son, let us go look for some place where I may hide, while thou dost return, as thou sayest, to seek and speak with my lady, from whose discretion and courtesy I look for favours more than miraculous." Sancho was in a fever to get his master out of the town, lest he should discover the falsehood of the reply he had brought to him in the Sierra Morena on behalf of Dulcinea, so he hastened their departure, which they took at once, and 2 miles out of the village they found a forest or thicket wherein Don Quixote ensconced himself, while Sancho returned to the city to speak to Dulcinea, in which embassy things befell him which demand fresh attention and a new chapter. End of chapter 9. Recording by John Leader, Bloomington, Illinois.